I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about my background and some of the situations I've seen and been involved in. My name's Major Williams. Been in law enforcement now well over 20 years. I've spent quite a bit of my time involved in the training, recruitment, and evaluation of law enforcement officers. I've worked as a supervisor on the street, detective, patrol officer, as well as academy instructor. I've had a chance to work with local law enforcement in urban environments. I've worked with small municipalities as well as federal agencies. And I've trained well over 3,000 officers directly, in addition to correction officers and security officers. I enjoy what I do, and I think it brings about some meaningful change.
Take the Oakland situation, very serious situation in Oakland, California, where looking at two ends of the same issue, we had a young man shot on tape. It was actually something that was recorded, shot in the back by a police officer that had him subdued, I believe, with another officer. Pretty much looked to be dead wrong, but not new to the experience of people who come from urban communities and minority communities. They've known for generations that things like that are done. Mainstream has largely ignored that reality, but I think more and more with the onset of videotape evidence, with cell phone cameras, video cameras being everywhere, people in the mainstream are starting to become increasingly aware that, wow, that police authority is something that can be abused, and is fairly regularly abused by too many of the people in that work.
Today, and I'm going to keep this very simple, because the DEA did a report, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And in that report, it indicated that the majority of consumption of narcotics in the United States was people who were white. The majority of people who were arrested were people who were of color. And their assimilation of all that was they felt that people of color were what they called more arrestable. They're on the corners. They're easy to see. They're high profile. Oh, we can see that guy a mile away. We can set up the surveillance. And let me back up to another point, and let's talk about this issue of crack versus powdered cocaine. Why is there almost 100-to-1 disparity in the amount of criminal, or I should say judicial force applied to individuals who have crack cocaine in one hand and powdered cocaine in the other? Because if you get caught with powdered cocaine, there is a tremendous chance that unless you have almost 500 grams, then you will face the 5-year mandatory, but 5 grams of crack will incite the same amount of activity. Now,
we could go example after example. Here in St. Louis, there's a case, very famous case here locally, Chain of Rocks case. It had all the usual elements that you see when something becomes very controversial relative to police-community interaction. It's a case involving the death of 2 girls, 2 young white girls, with 3 black defendants and 1 white defendant. Ultimately, we came to know that confessions in that case were coerced confessions, and that the evidence as it was presented points in a totally opposite direction from those who were ultimately convicted. And one kid in that case, Reggie Clemens, he's not a kid anymore, was taken from his home in good condition, clean, dry, just like I am now, by police officers. He was taken down to police headquarters to be questioned, questioned about his involvement or potential involvement in a crime that took place on the Chain of Rocks Bridge. Well, after he was taken from his home, he was 19 at the time, the next time anybody saw him was at his arraignment, where he was to be taken before a judge in charge with murder. Except that the judge had to stop the arraignment in order that Reggie Clemens be taken to a hospital emergency room to be treated for his injuries.
But let's start at the beginning. Racial profiling is defined as the practice by which police officers stop motorists of certain racial or ethnic groups because the officers believe that these groups are more likely than others to commit certain types of crimes. Now, racially and culturally biased policing occurs when law enforcement inappropriately considers race, ethnicity, or culture in dealing with whom and how to intervene in an enforcement capacity. So you see, this whole concept of biased policing includes this phenomenon of racial profiling. And one of the interesting facts I've discovered through the years is that through my interviews with different officers around the country, there are many officers who actually believe that certain races, especially African Americans, are genetically predisposed to be criminals, that they have a genetic capacity that they cannot control, which forces them to have to commit certain types of crimes. And these very same officers believe that it's their responsibility to be there to do something to correct that. Now, what they do and how they do it is certainly questionable. And I would also like to say that not all officers engage in these practices, but there are enough of them to make a difference. And those are the ones that good supervisors should be able to pinpoint, either get out of the business or retrain, re-instruct, and get them back on board.
Again, it falls to those who are in law enforcement, who come from some of these communities where people are victimized that way, to step up and acknowledge that reality and call people on their conduct, challenge them. I think in New York recently, well, when I say recently, within the last couple of 2 or 3 years, I think an organization of officers called 100 Black Officers That Care, or something like that, have called for an investigation around that Central Park case where the woman was assaulted, and I think sexually assaulted, in the Central Park a few years back. 5 minority youth were quickly arrested and charged. It turns out that none of them were involved, and now questions have come up as to how those confessions that those young men made were elicited. Well, you can pretty much damn well guess how they were elicited, and I think those officers have rightfully called for the people who were involved in that investigation to begin answering how they came to get confessions out of these young guys who had nothing to do with it. Some weeks later, you had the 3 Oakland officers tragically murdered. It was a horrible situation where those officers lost their lives, and all of us in society can understand the sense of loss and tragedy that surrounds people who are in service to a community losing their lives in the course of doing their work. What is at issue in all of that is how those two things come into play together. You have on the one side, again, a community that, based on its history of involvement with law enforcement, is largely in a position to feel like everything that is wrong with the police-community relationship is the police department's fault. You have law enforcement culture that indoctrinates its membership into thinking that, look, everything that's wrong with the police-community relationship is the community's fault. Well, neither one of those things are true.